You live here? Because you're standing around like you don't belong.
I'm waiting on a secure courier. You have zero cause to interrogate me in my own building.
Immigration operation. Show me proof of status or you're coming with me.
Cuff me if you want, but the 4K cameras in this lobby are about to end your career.
The lobby security camera at the Vantage Point Luxury Apartments in Arlington, Virginia, captured the incident in high-definition 4K resolution, preserving every pixel of the injustice that was about to unfold. At 10:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, the sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the polished marble floors and the contemporary art on the walls. Standing near the concierge desk was Marcus Thorne. At 56 years old, Thorne was a man who exuded a quiet, heavy kind of gravity. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit that cost more than most people's first cars. His posture upright, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He was checking his watch, waiting for a secure courier to deliver hard drives containing encrypted architectural schematics for a Department of Defense server farm. Marcus wasn't just a resident. He was a federal contractor with top-secret/SCI clearance, a man whose biometrics could open doors in the Pentagon that most generals couldn't access. He had spent 30 years building the digital fortresses that protected American intelligence. But to Officer Kyle Vane, who had just parked his unmarked SUV in the fire lane outside Marcus Thorne, was nothing more than a suspect waiting to be caught. Officer Vane pushed through the revolving glass doors with the swagger of a man who believed his badge granted him ownership of the space he occupied. He was 32 years old with a high and tight haircut and a tactical vest that looked too clean to have seen much action. He had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, specifically the Enforcement and Removal Operations Unit, for 4 years. He was on a saturation patrol in the area, a tactic often used to flush out visa overstays. But Vane had a habit of freestyling. He scanned the lobby, his eyes glossing over the elderly white woman walking her poodle and the young couple chatting by the elevators. His gaze locked onto Marcus. In Vane's mind, the calculus was simple and prejudiced: a black man standing idle in a lobby where the rent started at $4,000 a month didn't fit the demographic profile he had constructed in his head. There was no report of a disturbance. There was no warrant. There was just a man in a suit standing still and an officer who needed to assert dominance. Vane adjusted his belt, shifting the weight of his firearm, and walked straight toward Marcus. The concierge, a young man named Elias, looked up with a start, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Elias knew Mr. Thorne well. He knew he tipped generously at Christmas and never complained about package deliveries. But Elias froze, intimidated by the uniform and the aggressive stride of the federal agent. Marcus saw the officer approaching in his peripheral vision. He didn't turn fully. He simply angled his head, acknowledging the presence without surrendering his ground. He had been black in America for over 5 decades. He knew exactly what was happening before a word was spoken. He kept his face impassive, his heart rate steady. He had negotiated contracts worth billions. He wasn't going to be rattled by a beat cop with a chip on his shoulder. "Excuse me, partner," Vane said, his voice loud enough to echo slightly in the cavernous space. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't introduce himself. "You live in this building." Marcus turned slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He looked Vane up and down, noting the nameplate, the lack of a body camera, and the aggressive stance. "I'm waiting for a delivery officer. Can I help you with something?" Vane didn't like the non-answer. He stepped into Marcus's personal space, a classic intimidation tactic taught in the academy to provoke a reaction. "I asked you a simple question. Do you live here? We've had reports of people loitering in these lobbies scouting for burglaries. You look like you're waiting for something, all right." Marcus maintained eye contact. "I am waiting for a courier. And unless you have a specific articulable suspicion that I've committed a crime, I'm under no obligation to provide you with my personal address or my itinerary." The air in the lobby seemed to be sucked out of the room. Vane blinked his face, flushing a light shade of pink. He wasn't used to pushback. He was used to fear. He was used to people fumbling for their wallets, apologizing, begging not to be taken away. He wasn't used to a man in a suit citing legal standards with the dryness of a law professor. "Look," Vane said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more menacing. "This is an immigration enforcement operation. I have the authority to determine the status of individuals I suspect might be in the country illegally. Now you're acting evasive. That gives me reasonable suspicion, so I'm going to ask you again. Do you live here, and do you have identification proving your citizenship?" It was a leap of logic so profound it was almost impressive in its absurdity. Vane had taken a well-dressed man speaking perfect English and twisted it into an immigration investigation solely to save face. Marcus shifted his weight, planting his feet firmly. He knew the statutes. He knew United States versus Brignoni Ponce. He knew that looking out of place was not a legal basis for a stop. "Officer Vane," Marcus said, reading the name tag clearly. "You are making a significant error. I am a United States citizen. I am standing in the lobby of my own residence. Your assertion that my refusal to answer unwarranted questions constitutes reasonable suspicion is legally distinct from probable cause. You are currently detaining me without a valid basis. I suggest you walk away." Vane scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "You think you're a lawyer. You think a suit makes you untouchable." Vane's hand hovered near his cuffs. "I'm done asking. You're failing to comply with a federal agent. I'm detaining you for obstruction and for investigation of immigration status. Turn around." "I am not resisting," Marcus said clearly. His voice projected for the benefit of the concierge and the security camera. "But I am not consenting to this interaction. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." Vane grabbed Marcus's arm. The grip was tight, unnecessary. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He knew that any physical reaction, no matter how natural, would be used to justify force. "Turn around!" Vane barked, spinning Marcus toward the concierge desk. The elderly woman with the poodle gasped and hurriedly pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she hit record. Vane saw the phone, but didn't care. He was too deep in the tunnel vision of his own authority. He pulled Marcus's wrists behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, one, then two. Marcus Thorne, a man who had briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was now shackled in his own home by a man who didn't understand the magnitude of the mistake he was making. "You're making a mistake that will end your career," Marcus said quietly, his face pressed against the cool marble of the concierge desk where Vane had pushed him. "Check my wallet. The identification is in the left breast pocket." Vane laughed, a nervous, adrenaline-fueled sound. "Yeah, I'll check it. I bet I find a fake green card or some printed-out ID from a terrifyingly good mill. You guys always have the same story." Vane reached into Marcus's suit jacket, roughly patting him down. He pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. He opened it, expecting to find a foreign passport or a shoddy state ID. Instead, he saw a standard Virginia driver's license, and behind it a white card with a gold chip, a holographic overlay, and a blue strip across the top. It was a Department of Defense Common Access Card, CAC. But not just a standard contractor card. This one had specific coding on the back markings that indicated high-level access. Vane looked at the card, then at Marcus, then back at the card. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him hard. His brain refused to accept that the man he had profiled as a loiterer was actually a high-level federal asset. "Nice try," Vane sneered, covering his own doubt with bravado. "I've seen these before. You can buy these on the dark web for $500. High-quality laminate, but the chips never work." He shoved the wallet into his tactical vest pocket. "We'll see how real it is when we run it at the station. Let's go." Marcus didn't struggle as Vane marched him toward the door. He simply made eye contact with the woman filming. "Please send that video to the cloud immediately," he said to her. "Don't stop recording." Vane shoved Marcus forward. "Shut up. You're in custody." The ride to the Department of Homeland Security field office in Fairfax took 40 minutes. Vane drove with the radio off the silence in the car, thick and oppressive. In the rearview mirror, he kept glancing at Marcus, waiting for the crack in the facade, waiting for the plea, the confession that he was actually overstaying a visa or had a warrant in another state. But Marcus just sat there, staring out the window, his mind working like the engineer he was. He was cataloging every traffic violation Vane made: failure to signal speeding without lights and sirens, aggressive lane changes. He was memorizing the timeline. He was preparing the mental dossier that his lawyers would need. Vane, conversely, was starting to sweat. The adrenaline was fading, and the nagging voice in the back of his head was getting louder. The suit was really nice. The leather of the wallet was genuine. The neighbor didn't look scared of him. She looked scared for him. When they arrived at the processing center, Vane pulled Marcus out of the car with performative roughness, parading him past the front desk where 2 other agents were drinking coffee. "Got a live one," Vane announced, trying to garner approval. "Refused to ID belligerent, possessed a forged federal credential." The other agents looked at Marcus, dignified, calm, expensive suit, rumpled but not disheveled, and exchanged a glance. They didn't say anything, but the atmosphere shifted. Vane took Marcus to a holding cell, uncuffed one hand to secure him to the bench, and then walked over to the processing station. He took the forged CAC card out of his pocket and tossed it onto the desk of the intake officer, a young woman named Hernandez. "Log that as evidence. Forgery. I'm going to start the booking sheet." Hernandez picked up the card. She felt the weight of it. She looked at the chip. She had processed thousands of fake IDs. They usually felt like plastic credit cards. This felt like government property. "Vane," Hernandez said, her voice hesitant. "You might want to hold on a second. This looks legit." Vane waved her off from across the room where he was typing on a computer. "It's a good fake. Just scan it. It won't read." Hernandez shrugged and slid the card into the smart card reader attached to the secure DHS network. She expected an error message or a "card not recognized" prompt. Instead, her screen flickered, went black for a second, and then flashed a bright red banner that locked her terminal. A silent alarm triggered in the system. The text on the screen didn't say error. It said, "Alert Level 5, asset detected. Unauthorized access attempt. Security Protocol Alpha 9 initiated. Notify Watch Commander immediately." Hernandez's face went pale. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Vane," she whispered, then louder. "Vane." "What did you do?" In the corner office, Assistant Field Office Director Sarah Miller was reviewing budget reports when her phone rang the red phone. It was the Pentagon's automated security liaison. Her eyes widened as she listened to the synthesized voice. She hung up and sprinted out of her office down the hallway, bursting into the processing area. She saw Hernandez standing away from her locked computer and Vane typing up his report. "Who ran the card?" Miller screamed, her voice cracking with the intensity of the panic. "Who brought in the carrier of the card ending in 8942? Vane looked up, confused. "I did, Director. It's a forgery I confiscated off a suspect in Arlington. I was just..." Miller was in his face in 2 seconds. "You idiot! You absolute colossal idiot! That is not a forgery. That is a live DOD credential with Yankee White proximity clearance." "Where is the man?" Vane pointed toward the holding cell, his hand trembling slightly. He's in cell 2. But ma'am, he was loitering. He wouldn't answer my questions." Miller didn't listen. She ran to the cell. She saw Marcus Thorne sitting on the bench, his wrist cuffed to the bar. She signaled to the guard. "Open it. Now." The guard fumbled with the keys and swung the door open. Miller walked in her demeanor completely different from the fire she had shown Vane. She was professional, apologetic, and terrified. "Mr. Thorne," she said, recognizing the name from the alert. "I am Director Miller. I need to apologize profusely. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Please let me remove those." She unlocked the handcuff herself. Marcus rubbed his wrist slowly. He stood up and looked Miller in the eye. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Director." Marcus said, his voice ice cold. "It was a profiling incident." "And your agent has compromised the security of a classified architectural timeline by detaining me and seizing my credentials. I need my phone. I need to call the General Counsel at the Pentagon." Miller turned to Vane, who was now standing by the door looking like a ghost. "Give him his property. Everything. Now." Vane handed over the wallet, the phone, the watch. Marcus checked his phone. "I missed the courier," he said. "Do you have any idea how much that delay costs the taxpayers, Officer Vane?" Vane couldn't speak. He just shook his head. Marcus turned to Miller. "I am leaving. I am not signing anything. I am not answering any questions. You will preserve all video footage from the lobby, the transport vehicle, and this facility. If a single second of footage is corrupted or lost, I will add spoliation of evidence to the federal lawsuit I am filing before the sun goes down." He straightened his tie, brushed invisible dust off his lapel, and walked out of the station. Miller watched him go, then turned slowly to Vane. "Badge and gun," she said softly. "On my desk. You're done." Marcus didn't go home. He went straight to the offices of Sterling and Cho, a premier civil rights and constitutional law firm in D.C. By the time he sat down in the conference room, the video from the neighbor had already hit the internet. It was titled, "ICE Agent Arrests DOD Contractor in Luxury Lobby." It had 4 million views in 3 hours. The visual was striking the calm, well-dressed black man being manhandled by the younger, aggressive white officer. The lawsuit was filed the next morning. Thorne versus Vane et al. It alleged false imprisonment, assault, battery violation of the Fourth Amendment, violation of the Fifth Amendment, and racially motivated profiling. The discovery process was brutal. Marcus's lawyers demanded Vane's text messages and emails for the last 2 years. The government tried to block it, citing privacy, but the judge, a strict constitutionalist who hated sloppy police work, ordered the release. The texts were damning. Vane had a group chat with 3 other officers where they bragged about hunting expeditions in wealthy neighborhoods. They shared photos of minority men driving nice cars with captions like, "drug money" or "crypto scam." It wasn't just implicit bias, it was explicit documented targeting. They found that Vane had stopped 18 other black men in the last year under similar suspicious person pretenses, but none of them had the resources or the federal connections to fight back. They had just taken the harassment and moved on. Marcus Thorne was the wall Vane had finally crashed into. The Department of Justice attorneys looked at the evidence, looked at the texts, and looked at the viral video which was now being discussed on every major news network. They realized they couldn't go to trial. A trial would require Marcus to testify, which would bring up his work, his clearance, and the government's own security protocols. And it would put Vane's racism on public display for weeks. The settlement conference took place 6 months later. The government lawyers looked exhausted. Marcus sat across from them looking exactly as he had in the lobby, unflappable. They started with a low offer. Marcus's lawyer didn't even look up from his papers. "Mr. Thorne's reputation has been damaged. His security clearance was suspended for 3 weeks pending an investigation costing him valuable contract time, and his constitutional rights were trampled. We are starting at $6 million. The negotiation lasted 3 days. In the end, they settled for $5.2 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for an unlawful detention in the agency's history. But the money came with conditions from Marcus's side, a public admission of wrongdoing by the agency, and the permanent revocation of Kyle Vane's law enforcement certification. They agreed. Officer Kyle Vane was not just fired. He was decertified. His name was added to the National Decertification Index, ensuring he could never work as a police officer, a federal agent, or even an armed security guard anywhere in the United States. The last report of him was that he was working construction in Ohio, living in his brother's basement. He had lost his pension, his career, and his standing, all because he couldn't imagine a world where a black man in a suit belonged in a lobby that nice. Marcus Thorne took the $5.2 million and established a legal defense fund for federal contractors and employees of color who faced discrimination. He returned to his work securing the nation's secrets, but he never looked at a police car the same way again. The tragedy of this story isn't just what happened to Marcus Thorne. It's that for every Marcus Thorne, there are 1,000 others who don't have the Yankee White clearance or the high-powered legal team. There are thousands who get handcuffed, processed, and humiliated, and then just have to live with the trauma because the system is designed to protect the badge, not the citizen. Marcus won because he was exceptional, but justice shouldn't require you to be exceptional. It should be the standard. It should be the baseline. When we allow authority to go unchecked, when we allow gut feelings to override the Constitution, we endanger everyone. Liberty is fragile. It can be snatched away in a lobby on a Tuesday morning by a man who thinks he knows who you are just by looking at you. What do you think was the biggest mistake Officer Vane made? Was it the profiling, or was it the arrogance of ignoring the evidence right in front of him? And do you think a $5, $2 million settlement is enough to punish a system that allows this to happen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story. We need to keep shining a light on these injustices until they stop happening.
Step away from the truck, hands on the hood, now.
I'm here for my son. Tell me what crime you think I committed.
You match a bolo, reach for anything and you're going down.
I'm reaching for my wallet slowly, and you're about to assault a disabled combat veteran on camera.
Agent Derek Vance had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for just over 4 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the taxpayers of his city $3.4 million. He was 29 years old, aggressive, and driven by a metric-based ambition that often blurred the lines between law enforcement and harassment. He operated with a simple, flawed philosophy. Everyone is guilty of something. You just have to shake them hard enough to find out what it is. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October, outside the manicured grounds of Oak Hill Academy, Vance received a tip from a nervous school administrator about a military-aged male lurking near the student parking lot. The man in question was Marcus Thorne, a retired Marine Master Sergeant and a decorated combat veteran. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's demeanor, dismissing his identification, and sweeping a wounded war hero to the asphalt in front of parents and faculty, would become a definitive case study in how unchecked authority and implicit bias can shatter the public trust. Before we get into the details of this afternoon, let me ask you, where are you joining us from today? If you believe that our veterans deserve better than to be treated like criminals in the country they served, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We tell these stories because the truth matters, and your support helps us keep the spotlight where it belongs. Oak Hill Academy sits on a quiet, tree-lined boulevard in the suburbs, the kind of place where tuition rivals the average national income and the lawns are manicured with surgical precision. It was 2:15 p.m. The autumn sun was bright, casting long shadows across the brick facade of the main building. The pickup line hadn't fully formed yet, but early arrivals were idling in their luxury SUVs, checking emails and waiting for the final bell. Marcus Thorne had arrived 10 minutes early. He parked his pristine charcoal gray pickup truck in the designated waiting zone, stepped out to stretch his legs, and leaned against the driver's side door. At 48 years old, Marcus Thorne cut an imposing figure. He stood 6'2", with the kind of posture you can't fake and you can't buy. It has to be drilled into you over decades of morning formations. He wore a simple navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki cargo pants and sturdy leather boots. He was waiting for his youngest son, a senior, who was wrapping up football practice. Thorne wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was simply existing, enjoying the crisp fall air, checking his watch with the patience of a man who had spent hours waiting in transport planes and desert convoys. But to the eyes watching him from the second-floor administrative office, Marcus Thorne didn't look like a parent. He looked like a threat. Marcus Thorne was not a man who rattled easily. You don't survive 22 years in the United States Marine Corps by panicking when things get quiet. Thorne had enlisted at 18, right out of high school, driven by a sense of duty that had run in his family for 3 generations. He had served in the infantry, moving up the ranks through sheer competence and grit. He'd done 2 tours in Fallujah. He'd lost friends. He'd taken shrapnel in his left leg from an IED blast that earned him a Purple Heart and a permanent aching stiffness when the rain set in. After retiring with the rank of Master Sergeant, he hadn't slowed down. He transitioned into a high-level logistics consulting role for a defense contractor. He held a security clearance that was higher than most of the federal agents operating in the state. Thorne was a man of routine and discipline. He valued order. He taught his children that respect was earned, that the law was to be followed, and that character was defined by what you did when no one was watching. He was a pillar of his church and a volunteer at the local VA hospital. But none of that history was visible to Greg Miller. Greg Miller was 34 years old, the newly appointed vice principal of Oak Hill Academy. He was a man who prided himself on vigilance. He had come from a corporate security background before moving into education administration, and he treated the high school less like a place of learning and more like a fortress under constant siege. Miller had been on the job for only 6 months, but he had already developed a reputation among the staff for being high-strung and overly suspicious of anyone who didn't fit the specific demographic mold of the Oak Hill clientele. From his window, Miller watched Thorne. He didn't see a father. He didn't see a veteran. He saw a black man with a muscular build standing next to a truck that Miller didn't recognize, despite Thorne having picked his son up from this exact spot for 3 years. Miller's mind began to race, filling in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. He had seen a bulletin earlier that week from a regional task force about a fugitive wanted for trafficking, a vague description that matched Thorne only in broad strokes: tall, heavy build, potentially armed. Miller squinted through the blinds. Thorne crossed his arms, his biceps straining against the fabric of his polo. To Miller, that wasn't a man resting. That was a man posturing. That was a lookout. Instead of walking outside to ask the man if he needed help or simply checking the vehicle registration against the student-parent database, Miller decided to escalate. He wanted to be the hero who intercepted a danger before it entered the school grounds. He picked up his phone and bypassed the local police non-emergency line, dialing a direct contact he had at the Regional Federal Task Force, a number meant for serious active threats. "This is Greg Miller at Oak Hill. We have a situation," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is a suspicious individual loitering near the student lot. He matches the description of that fugitive from the bulletin. He's military-aged, black male, aggressive posture. I need someone here now before the students come out." The call was routed to Agent Derek Vance. If you were to look at Vance's personnel file, you would see a portrait of an officer who was dangerous precisely because he technically followed the rules, he just bent them until they snapped. In his 4 years with the agency, Vance had racked up impressive numbers. He was a stats guy. He measured his success in detainments and interrogations. But behind the numbers was a trail of complaints that had been systematically swept under the rug. There were 7 formal grievances filed against him. 4 involved profiling. 3 involved excessive use of force. Vance had a reputation for what his colleagues called fishing. He would find a pretext to stop someone, a broken taillight, loitering suspicious behavior, and then escalate the encounter until he found a reason to make an arrest. He believed that if you pressed hard enough, everyone would crack. His supervisors, under pressure to show high-activity metrics, often looked the other way. "Vance gets results," they would say in performance reviews, ignoring the fact that his results were often built on the violation of civil liberties. When the call came in from Oak Hill Academy, Vance didn't hear "check out a parent." He heard "fugitive." He heard "career-making arrest." He was sitting in his unmarked SUV with his partner, a rookie named Sarah Jenkins, who was only 3 months out of the academy. Jenkins was still learning the ropes, often deferring to Vance's experience, a dynamic that Vance exploited to validate his aggressive tactics. "We got a live one," Vance said, throwing the car into gear. "Oak Hill. Administrator says he matches the bolo for the interstate trafficker." "The guy from the briefing?" Jenkins asked, checking her computer terminal. "That suspect is listed as having a scar on his left cheek and tattoos on his neck. Did the caller confirm that?" "Caller said he matches. That's enough for a Terry stop," Vance said, cutting the siren but accelerating hard. "We catch him before he runs. If this is him, we're looking at a commendation." They arrived at the school in 12 minutes. Vance swung the SUV around the corner and killed the engine 100 feet from where Thorne was standing. Through the windshield, Vance stared at the man. Thorne was still leaning against his truck, checking his phone, now looking completely at ease. Most fugitives are nervous. They look around. They pace. They keep the engine running. Thorne was doing none of that. But Vance didn't see calmness. He saw arrogance. He saw a criminal who thought he was untouchable. "He's big," Vance muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Watch his hands. If he reaches for anything, you draw." "He's just standing there, Derek," Jenkins said, a note of hesitation in her voice. "He's right in the pickup lane. Maybe we should run the plate first." "No time. If he sees us run the plate, he bolts. We take control of the situation immediately. That's how you stay alive." Vance opened his door and stepped out, his hand already resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. He adjusted his sunglasses, set his jaw, and began to march toward Thorne. He didn't walk like a peace officer looking to investigate. He walked like a soldier entering a combat zone. Marcus Thorne looked up as the two agents approached. He had spent enough time in conflict zones to recognize body language, and what he saw in Derek Vance was aggression. Thorne straightened up, taking his hands out of his pockets slowly and deliberately keeping them visible. It was a survival instinct honed in checkpoints from Fallujah to Ramadi. He didn't know who these men were. They were in plain clothes with tactical vests that said police in yellow letters, but they weren't local PD. Vance stopped 10 feet away, creating a tactical gap. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for a name. He barked an order. "Step away from the vehicle, hands where I can see them." Thorne didn't flinch. He kept his hands at chest level, palms open. "I'm right here, officer. My hands are visible. I'm waiting for my son. Is there a problem?" "I said step away from the vehicle." Vance shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the school. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood. Now." "I need to know why I'm being detained," Thorne said, his voice calm, deep, and resonant. It was the voice of a man who had commanded platoons. "I am a parent at this school. I'm legally parked. I have identification right here in my back pocket. I don't care who you say you are. You match the description of a wanted fugitive. Now for the last time, get on the hood or I will put you on the hood." Vance closed the distance, his hand tightening on his weapon. The rookie Jenkins looked uncomfortable. She glanced around. A few parents in other cars had rolled down their windows. A teacher walking across the lawn had stopped to watch. This was a public spectacle, and the man they were shouting at didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a statue of dignity. Thorne held his ground, not out of defiance, but out of principle. He knew his rights. "Officer, I am a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. I am going to reach into my back right pocket and remove my wallet to show you my ID. I am doing this slowly." "Do not reach." Vance lunged forward. "I am informing you of my actions." Thorne set his eyes, locking onto Vance's hidden gaze behind the sunglasses. "I have a U.S. passport card and a veteran's ID. You are making a mistake." "You think I haven't seen fake military IDs before?" Vance sneered, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "That's the oldest trick in the book. Turn around, now." This is the moment where policing fails, when an officer decides that his authority is more important than the truth. Vance had already decided Thorne was guilty. Any evidence to the contrary was just a deception. He didn't want to see the ID because if the ID was real, Vance would have to admit he was wrong. And Derek Vance did not like being wrong. Do you think officers should be required to de-escalate and verify identification before going hands-on in nonviolent situations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thorne remained still. I am not turning around until you tell me what fugitive I supposedly resemble. I have a right to know the nature of this inquiry. That's it, Vance snapped. Vance grabbed Thorne's left wrist. Thorne didn't pull back, but he didn't go limp either. He was a solid wall of muscle. Vance yanked, trying to spin him. Thorne barely moved. Stop resisting, Vance shouted, playing to the imaginary audience, trying to justify the force he was about to use. I am not resisting, Thorne said loudly, ensuring the witnesses could hear. I am standing still. You are escalating. Vance didn't listen. He dropped his weight and swung his leg in a hard, tactical sweep, aiming for the back of Thorne's knees. He connected solidly with Thorne's left leg, the leg that had taken shrapnel in 2004. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up Thorne's leg. His knee buckled not from a lack of strength, but from the sudden agonizing flare of an old war wound. He gasped, falling forward. Vance shoved him hard between the shoulder blades, driving him face first into the pavement. Get on the ground. Give me your hands. Vance was on top of him instantly, a knee pressing into Thorne's lower back. Thorne groaned, his cheek pressed against the grit of the asphalt. He didn't fight back. He knew that if he fought back, he might die. He let his arms be pulled behind him. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. You are under arrest for failure to comply and resisting a federal agent. Vance panted, the adrenaline coursing through him. He felt triumphant. He had taken down the big man. By now a crowd had gathered. Phones were out. The parents of Oak Hill Academy were recording. They weren't cheering for the police. They were horrified. He didn't do anything, a woman shouted from her minivan. He's waiting for his kid. That's Mr. Thorne, another parent yelled, stepping out of his car. He's a veteran. What are you doing? Jenkins. The rookie looked at the crowd and then at her partner. She saw the blood trickling from a scrape on Thorne's forehead where he'd hit the ground. She saw the grimace of pain on his face as Vance leaned his full weight on the bad leg. Derek, we have him secured, Jenkins whispered urgently. Get off him. People are filming. Vance ignored her. He reached into Thorne's pocket and yanked out the wallet. He flipped it open, looking for the fake ID he was sure he'd find. He pulled out the cards, his fingers trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade and reality started to creep in. He saw the driver's license. Marcus Thorne. Valid. Address in the upscale neighborhood 3 miles away. He saw the Department of Defense identification card. Retired. He saw the VA healthcare card. He saw a folded piece of paper, a list of grocery items written in neat cursive. Vance stared at the cards. The bolo he was acting on was for a man named Darius King, age 26. The man beneath his knee was 48. The man in the bolo had neck tattoos. Thorne's neck was bare, save for a small scar. The silence that followed was deafening. Vance looked up. A dozen cell phones were pointed at him like a firing squad. He looked down at the wallet again. Get him up, Vance said, his voice losing its edge. My leg, Thorne gritted out through clenched teeth. You kicked my bad leg. I can't stand yet. At that moment, a siren wailed. Not the federal SUV, but a local police cruiser. It screeched to a halt right behind Vance's vehicle. The door flew open, and a uniformed police lieutenant stepped out. It was Lieutenant Mike Reynolds, the shift commander for the local precinct. Reynolds pushed through the crowd, his face pale with rage. He knew Marcus Thorne. They played poker together on Thursday nights. Thorne was the godfather to Reynolds' youngest daughter. Get your knee off him! Reynolds roared, his hand resting on his own baton. Vance! Get off him now! Vance looked up, startled. Lieutenant, this suspect matched a suspect. Reynolds was in Vance's face in 2 seconds. That is a Master Sergeant of the Marine Corps. That is a pillar of this community. You verify before you touch. Get him up. Vance scrambled back. Reynolds knelt down, his demeanor shifting instantly to gentleness. Marcus, are you okay? Legs bad. Mike, Thorne whispered. He swept the bad knee. Unlock these cuffs, Reynolds ordered Jenkins, who was already reaching for her key, her hands shaking. As the cuffs clicked open, Thorne rolled onto his back, wincing. Reynolds helped him sit up. The vice principal, Greg Miller, had come out of the school building, now watching from the safety of the sidewalk, his face draining of color as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He looked like the description, Vance stammered, holding the wallet. I was doing my job. Thorne looked at Vance. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying intensity. You didn't do your job, son. You did your prejudice. And you just broke a federal law by assaulting a disabled veteran without cause. The fallout was immediate, nuclear, and televised. The videos hit social media before Thorne was even in the ambulance. #VeteranArrested trended globally within 3 hours. The image of a white federal agent kneeling on the back of a black Marine veteran at a school pickup line became the defining photo of the year. Thorne was taken to the hospital. He had a torn meniscus and severe bruising to the bone injuries that would require surgery and months of rehabilitation complicating his existing disability. But the legal injury was far worse. The city of Oak Hill, the police department, and the federal agency were all named in the lawsuit filed 3 weeks later. The suit didn't just allege excessive force. It alleged a conspiracy of bias. It named Greg Miller for the discriminatory call. It named Derek Vance for the assault and unlawful arrest. It named the agency for negligent supervision. The discovery phase of the trial was brutal for Vance. His entire history of complaints was unsealed. The jury heard about the fishing expeditions. They heard the recording of Miller's call where he emphasized black male and aggressive regarding a man standing still. The settlement came swiftly. The city and the federal government agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $3, $4 million, to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more rot in the system. Greg Miller was fired by the school board for violating anti-discrimination policies and endangering a parent. He has not worked in education since. Derek Vance was terminated. He was stripped of his badge and gun. He faced criminal charges for assault under color of authority, eventually pleading down to a misdemeanor that permanently barred him from law enforcement. But the money and the firings were not the end. Marcus Thorne stood on the steps of the courthouse on the day the settlement was announced. He leaned heavily on a cane, his posture still upright, his dignity untouched. I fought for this country, Thorne told the sea of microphones. I bled in the sand so that Americans could be free from fear, free from tyranny. But on that Tuesday, I wasn't a veteran. I wasn't a citizen. I was just a target. If they can do this to me with my service record and my resources, what are they doing to the young men who have neither? He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Liberty isn't a gift. It's a practice. And when we let bias wear a badge, we lose that liberty. We have to be better. We have to demand better. The silence that followed his words was heavy. It was the sound of a community forced to look in the mirror. Marcus Thorne used a portion of his settlement to start a legal defense fund for victims of wrongful arrest. He still picks his son up from school, but he doesn't stand by the truck anymore. He sits inside watching the rearview mirror, a constant reminder that for some, the war never really ends. What do you think is the solution to preventing incidents like this? Should callers like Greg Miller face criminal charges for making biased reports? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe. We will continue to bring you the truth one story at a time. Thank you for watching.